I'll gladly zoom in to Moscow, because today so much happened in Moscow. It's gonna take a while to get through it, but let's get started. The first big explosion, the first big, extremely careless smoking case was on the Zagorsk optical device plant. This device also is responsible for making thermal and night vision devices for the Russian army. Extremely sensitive material that Russia has trouble producing due to the sanctions. Well, this was the biggest plant able to produce such stuff inside Russia, and now it goes kaboom into the space. I guess it wanted to join the turrets of the Russian T-72s onto the moon, but you know, a plant doesn't have a turret, so it doesn't work. On this footage you can really see the power of this explosion, because a few hundred meters away high-rise apartment buildings have lost all of their windows, and if you look into the courtyard you can see the windows with the surrounding support systems on the courtyard. So they have just popped out of the house and fallen onto the courtyard. No windows anymore. There's a shade of mystery over this explosion, because the authorities are saying that it started on the boiler room. It was an accident. But the locals report drones. And also in one of the most sensitive military factories of Russia, I suspect something is off here. And on this footage we can see an artillery shell that probably exploded and landed, and now you can see it on the footage. What is an artillery shell doing in Moscow region? We are so used to seeing these shells, but in a civilian world you never see these shells, and if you do, there's probably a shell factory nearby. And after this explosion, these shells are everywhere. They flew all over the place. So we can only assume that they also hosted, held or stored artillery munitions for some reason. So it was a full military target explosion. Social media and locals report about 10 deaths, 8 missing personnel and 43 injured. So this was no small incident. This factory produced devices that were used in armored vehicles, artillery systems, aviation systems, also night vision and thermal visions, as I mentioned. Optical devices that Russia is in huge deficit of, and they cannot produce much because of sanctions, but this factory was able to make them. Well, not anymore, because it's hard to produce anything if your building doesn't exist. The factory also made components for the Ka-52 Alligator attack helicopter. This was only the first explosion. As I mentioned, there's one more in the Moscow region, and this one goes even closer to Moscow. In the vicinity of Domodedovo airport, there were explosions, and locals are reporting that 2 drones were shot down throughout the night and a fire started. Reportedly, a car maintenance service was on fire. The sky over the airport was closed throughout the night, and let's remember, this is the airport that hosts Moscow's international flights. Russian command structure has always tried to make it look like Russia can handle everything and Moscow is untouchable. But when the sky is closed, your planes cannot land and have to circle around Moscow because the sky is too dangerous to land, this sends another message. So these reoccurring drone attacks, 1 drone, maybe 2 drones every night to Moscow, they're really showing the vulnerability of the Russian defense systems, of the Russian anti-air systems and Moscow. And this is still not it with the careless smoking. Actually, more careless smoking happened in Sevastopol last night. Russian authorities claimed that 11 drones were shot or fired to Sevastopol by Ukraine, kamikaze drones, out of which 2 were shot down and 9 were brought down using electronic warfare systems. I mean, this is Russian information, so take it with a grain of salt and assume that some of them connected, because locals report explosions and fires and they couldn't sleep peacefully. Now I'll zoom into the northern region of Crimea, where drone attacks are occurring every night, and Russia has stopped reporting about them, because reporting about them means that Ukraine is able to shoot drones and missiles to Crimea all the time without any punishment, and half of the time Russia is unable to shoot them down or use electronic warfare systems on them. So reporting about these attacks reduces the image of effective Russian air defense systems and overall that Russia is in control, which they're not. And Ukraine is of course not reporting about the attacks because of OPSEC. So how do we know about these attacks? Because locals are not sleeping peacefully. That's the #1 source right now. But now, my friends, the most exciting area of the entire front line for me actually is the Kozatsky-Lakheri new bridgehead that Ukraine developed a few days ago, and it is added on this map, as you can see, a new yellow area on the Russian occupied side of the Dnipro River, right next to Kozatsky-Lakheri settlement, and it's a pretty big area. As we can see, there are some waterways here. It's a wetlands, you cannot really transport any heavy equipment onto this ground because it cannot carry it, but infantry is good enough. Now, we have more information about this, and for sure now we know it's about 50 to 60 Ukrainian Special Forces troops, which is unfortunately not enough to do anything major, but it is enough to make the mobilized Russian defensive troops here flee, which they have done. See, Russia held Desantnik forces here, they're semi-special forces. But when things went really bad in Robotyne, they deployed their Desantnik forces away from this front to Robotyne and filled the gaps with mobilized troops who are weak, let's say it that way, the simplest way. They're not trained, they're not motivated, they're weak. And against Ukrainian special forces, even if there are only 50 of them, there's no match. And this is why yesterday we got the first footage of this area. This is a burning Russian BTR-82. Why this bridgehead is so important is that, as I mentioned, the defensive lines are a lot weaker, a lot thinner in this area, filled with mobilized troops, no motivation, no training. And the secondary reason is that this area here is almost not mined at all. Russia heavily mines the southern front, but not this Dnipro front or Kherson front, however you want to call it. It's somehow mined, but you cannot even compare it. If any kind of breakthrough would happen around this area, it would be very fast and quick because mines wouldn't stop the tempo of the advancing Ukrainian troops. Unfortunately, for any kind of advancement, you need armor, which is not possible yet with this ground that we see here, because it's a wetlands. For armor to be transported over, Ukrainian bridgehead needs to connect to these fields, as you can see right here. Strong ground that can grow crops, therefore carry artillery. This is wet grounds, mostly bogs and marshes and these waterways right here. So what it does now is divert Russian attention and force perhaps Russia to send back some units to defend this area. But as of now, I don't see any kind of future push from Ukraine in this area. But if it happens, I'm very positively surprised. Ukraine is seriously drawing Russian attention into the area because in this video we can see Ukrainian MR-70 Vampire, which is a 120mm rocket launcher, shell the settlement. Therefore shell the Russian positions, drawing yet more Russian attention into the area. They're making it look like they're starting a heavy push in the area, which by my information right now is yet not possible, but they're sure making it look like it, forcing Russia to deploy more reserves into the area, which is the goal. Now, my friends, let's go to the northern front, Novozilivsk, and I'll zoom into it for you. You have all heard the news, but it happened day by day, so I didn't want to report it before, but now it is confirmed. This element of Novozilivsk on the front is under Russian control. During the past week, they have very strongly started to push towards this element with tanks. They usually push with infantry fighting vehicles and armored vehicles, but I guess they saved their T-72s for this settlement, and unfortunately it was successful. They occupied most of the settlement in the past 5 days. The reason why I don't report every minor movement is that Ukraine also counterattacks. These settlements can change hands several times a day, actually. So if you have heard about this report and are saying, oh, old news, well, there's a reason why. Now we know it's under Russian occupation. If Ukraine doesn't divert any kind of reserves into the area, it will remain under Russian occupation. And now, my friends, we'll go to the area where most of the heaviest fighting happened throughout the last 24 hours. This is the northern front, the city of Kupiansk, and north from it, Liman Pershi, Liman, however you want to call, I'm sorry about the names. Well, Ukrainians are incredibly heavily pushing from this area, and Russian Air Force is, to react to this, very active, dropping Fab 250 and Fab 500 glide bombs onto the Ukrainian positions and armor. Unfortunately, these glide bombs have proven to be very effective and deadly. I mean, they're huge. Fab 500, that's a beast of a bomb, and a glide bomb, meaning that Russia has converted this dumb Fab 500 into a kind of a GPS guided bomb. I mean, it's a Russian device, so it's not that accurate, but if you have a Fab 500, a 10-meter miss doesn't mean anything, just the explosion is so big. So they are effective, unfortunately, and after tomorrow we can see if Ukrainian heavy push here carries any kind of results, but knowing the Russian aviation activity here, we know Ukraine is taking heavy losses. I hate to report it, but I have to. And now, my friends, for the last frontline update, we go to Urozhaine, which I have reported in the last 2 weeks that is in the threat of being surrounded. This settlement right here, and if you look at the map, it's obvious. Russians, if I was a Russian unit commander in this area, I would pull back immediately because it's a kill box for Ukrainians. They can strike it from almost 3 sides with artillery, which they're doing. And we know what the Russians are doing. It's much like Klishivka. Troops die in their defensive positions due to artillery. Actually, cluster munitions, which Ukrainians are using here. And Russians just send in new troops. That's the pattern. But now I will read you a report from the Russian Vostok commander, who is responsible for holding Urozhaine. And this gives us an idea of the situation for Russians in the settlement. There is information that from some positions the enemy, the Ukrainians, managed to squeeze us out. And Urozhaine was partially encircled, but it is difficult to understand the real situation right now. So Urozhaine is partially circled, information coming from the Russian commander responsible for the holding of the settlement. Of course, holding of these settlements is a political order from Moscow, because any kind of military commander with any kind of strategic understanding of the situation would pull back from Urozhaine, would pull back from Novodonetsk to establish a certain defensive line without any threat of breakthroughs. If these kind of salients happen, you pull back with your troops and establish another defensive line. Since Russia has so much men that they don't care about, they can use this tactic of just sending meat to the mincing machine. And unfortunately, it is effective because Ukrainian advances are stalled. Russian Defense Minister Sergei Shoigu said this yesterday. Poland is building the most powerful army on the continent and has begun large-scale arms purchases. And if Shoigu is saying this, and I've been saying this for a year now, let's just look at this photo, for example. This is the newest information about the Polish military spending. As you can see, they are #1 in NATO. Military spending of the GDP. Of course, United States is by numbers #1. I mean, nobody is even close, but percentage of GDP, Poland is now 3.9%. And I'm so glad to see Estonia here with their 2.73%, also a very good number. But Poland is even planning to expand that percentage, even bigger. If we look at Northern and Eastern Europe geopolitics in the next 50 years, then there is one country who will be the major player. It's not Belarus, it's not Russia, it is Poland with their military. They will be the military guarantor of the area. Estonia, Latvia, Lithuania will also not so much rely on NATO but on Poland, because their military is in the next 10 years becoming the most powerful on the European continent, rivaling that of Russia and China. My friends, these are the Russian losses of the past 24 hours, 10th of August. 580 liquidated personnel, which is about 7-day average. Yesterday we saw a huge increase in the liquidated personnel, and also yesterday 250,000 liquidated Russian personnel was achieved altogether, which is incredibly high. I mean, it is a population of some countries in the world. Then we have 16 tanks lost by the Russians because, as I mentioned, from Novosibirsk they heavily pushed with tanks. Also 13 armored personnel vehicles, 15 artillery systems, 4 UAVs, 16 vehicles and fuel tanks, and 4 special equipment. Losses about 7-day average, except for the tanks, which are heavily over the 7-day average. Overall, huge losses and unsustainable. Now, my friends, let's look at the security situation of the Black Sea. We all remember at the beginning of August the attacks on Russian landing ships, then the tanker, and now Ukraine has given a 2-week grace period on all of the tankers, all of the merchant ships that are doing business with Russia on the Black Sea. They have 2 weeks to pack or unpack their cargo, load or unload actually, and leave the Black Sea area, because after that the Ukrainian threat is active again, that any kind of vessel seen on Ukrainian territorial waters, which also includes the Crimean territorial waters, Crimea is Ukraine, they are being treated as military vessels carrying military cargo, and they will be targeted with Ukrainian maritime drones. Now, this is a huge hit for Russians. About 20% of the entire Russian oil export and about 70% of their entire grain export happens through the Black Sea via shipping. If Ukraine is able to close that shipping lane, which it seems like they are able to do that with their drones, Russia loses a lot of money, like a lot of money. They lose more money than Ukraine with the grain deal. According to Reuters, the same amount of grain it takes to insure for one day costs about $10,000 more than it would cost for Bulgaria or Romania to insure. So Russian insurance on the Black Sea per day is $10,000 more expensive than those two countries I mentioned. The main issue is insurance. There are always insurance companies who are ready to insure ships in military threat situations, in war zones, but this insurance is incredibly expensive, making it quite pointless to export grain and oil because it will just eat through your profits. So Russia has begun using what we call a shadow fleet, smaller vessels without any kind of insurance, to export grain to Syria and northern African countries who don't really care much about if the vessel is insured or not. Any Western country cannot accept any purchases if the vessel isn't insured. Also, Russia is forced to allow their partners like Syria and the northern African countries to pay for oil and grain in their own native currencies. This in further weakens the ruble against these currencies. I mean, ruble is already extremely weak, and right now the course is $1 is about 97 rubles. After this, the ruble weakens even more. If they start accepting the northern African countries' currencies against the ruble will drop below 100 ruble cents per $1 in like 30 to 40 days. That's my prediction. That's an incredible drop, and they have to raise interest, which makes the economy even slower in addition to the sanctions. So Ukraine, with this Black Sea shenanigans right here with their drones, has an incredible weapon against Russian economy that has a long-term effect. And now, my friends, these soldiers are from Orenburg Oblast. They are almost all 45 years and plus, and they're mobilized. They joined the army because of the money that Russian Minister of Defense was offering. Well, they are trying to do their shadow mobilization or hidden mobilization just through pure money. Lying to people that they get a lot of money when they join the army. In reality, they join the army, Russian Minister of Defense doesn't pay them, and then they are not allowed to leave. Let me illustrate. Videos, of course, translated by Dmitry. On behalf of all of my comrades here, we're all from Orenburg Oblast. We are on contracts, essentially volunteers. Our average age is 45 plus. We came to defend our motherland. With this in mind, I'd like to address all citizens of Russia, the government, the prosecution, the president. Again, we see the turning to the Tsar. If only the Tsar knew how I'm suffering, he would change the situation. My friend, the Tsar made the system. He is the reason for your suffering. Regarding our governor of the richest region in Russia, which has oil and gas and all you need, but he's unable to find money for payment to the servicemen for their families. We have all families and children, we have houses. We're unable to pay the bills for gas and electricity because our governor thinks he needs money more than we or our families. Well, let me tell you what the governor is doing with the money. He takes it, he builds villas, he buys expensive cars, he buys private jets. That is how a Russian oligarchy works. That is how the top brass Russian political system works. Nothing new here. It has worked like that for 20 years. You take money that is meant for the people and you buy what you want with it. That is Russia. I'm asking everyone to spread this video message and bring it to an end. We'll be having elections soon. Electing him again, I don't think we need him in the region. Everyone supports me. The thing is, this small fish here thinks that if you take away the head, the dragon will die. No, the system produces these men who take and steal the money. If you take away one man, another one will fill his shoes because the system around it is corrupt and made like that. Putin has made the system like that. Taking away Putin or any kind of leader in the Russian political command structure doesn't change anything because the entire system, country and culture is based on corruption and lies. You cannot eliminate that system by eliminating one part of it. The entire system needs to come crashing down. That's it. Thanks everyone. Well, thank you to you too, Mr. Soldier Man. My friends, and now the juiciest part of the video. Like at the end of every video, this always happens as death and taxes. There's also Patreon butchering of my videos. For the last 4 years I've done it, and I will not stop because your names keep coming in and I do rely on them. Very directly, I do rely on them. Thank you to these 5 Patreons. Jak Henry, Kapi Mimovic, Joe Fitzpatrick, Victor van Oderdic, Valeria Utkarden, Utkaren, yes. Thank you to these 5 people for supporting the channel. If you like my channel, then tier 10 and above, and you'll need earplugs for your ears, cause I'll make them bleed. Also, my friends, check out my Twitter account, because most important news, as soon as they happen, they're on my Twitter account on the most compact form possible. Also, check out my Instagram, because photos and videos of my trips to Kiev or trips to anywhere and my life are on my Instagram. And until my next video, my friends, Slava Ukraini.